Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of No One's a Critic. I am Kino, joined as always by Mac, and I'm gonna keep to my word and make these a little bit more interesting to start off with, and just how have you been? So, the question I want to start off asking you this week is, why should I go see Dune 2? Because we just kind of briefly talked about that before we hopped into the podcast. And I told Mac that I didn't really want to go see it in theaters. Like I wasn't that hyped for it. And he let out a sigh of despair on that. So I know you're super excited about it. So why don't you give me a little bit of a pitch here about why I should go see it?
I mean, it's awesome.
It's
Chalamet's
awesome.
got the juice. Um, no, I think what for me as someone who is a fan of the Dune series, even the later books, which are very, very, very weird. It gets
Hmm.
really fucking weird.
Yeah.
Um, it, you know, for some people it's Star Wars, for some people it's Lord of the Rings. And we can talk about those because I feel like I have some thoughts as someone who's two films into the Lord of the Rings series. I don't know. For some reason, Dune just it for me personally, it just gets me. It just
Yeah.
like as cringy as that sound. I don't know why it just fits. It's I think particularly what I find so fascinating about Dune is just how gutsy it is in subverting um its tropes. So
Yeah.
it's and this is why. Have you seen part one? Dune part
I've seen
one.
part one. Yeah. Yeah.
So what's really interesting is that I think a lot of people will watch Dune Part One and they'll be like, "Oh, this kind of is playing out very cliche." It's like, "Oh, there's the
Yeah.
chosen one, and there's the people, and they're gonna go against the bad guys." Um, and it's really unfortunate because if you've read the full novel, this gets completely turned on its head in Part
Yeah.
Two, uh, and the film does a very, very, very good job at it changes a decent amount from the source material,
Yeah.
and at least for my view, all for the better
Yeah.
for communicating this a lot better. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just it's my sci-fi series, you know.
Yeah. No, I don't want to spend too much time on this just because, like I said, I'm not super familiar with it. But I did agree that part of the reason that made me not really want to go see part two as much, and I actually I know the story of Dune. I've read a little bit about it. I watched some videos about it, but I just felt that like part one, like while it was a good film, it didn't blow me away in any way, and that's why I didn't kind of go into this being like, oh my god, I can't wait for the second part. um but you think that that's kind of intentional, that like part one is a little bit more predictable, a little bit more by the numbers, to kind of set up this real crazy subversion that's going to do in part two.
Yes. Well, I think obviously one it is due to um just time constraints.
Yeah.
Um, there is the way part end because there is sort of like a midpoint of the novel,
Yeah.
and it's where part one ends. It's very what's what I'm looking for. It's very clear like where the
Yeah.
midpoint is. Like in the not really a spoiler, but in the novel it actually jumps ahead a decent amount of time. In
Hmm.
the film version does not. Again, I won't spoil it for anyone. The film version does not, but it makes sense as it was a good
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I so yeah, like on one hand, it is due to time because David Lynch actually tried to make his Dune back in 1984,
Yeah.
and he had to put the entire novel into one 2-hour film, and it did not turn out well.
Hmm.
It's very strange, very not good. It's fun, but it's not a good
Yeah.
movie. Um, but also, yeah, I also think that there is something to say of like part one really sets it up as if it's going to be a very um cliche white savior messiah leads the people to freedom esque tale, only to then turn it on its head. And
Yeah.
that was Frank Herbert, the author. That was his whole point. It was
Yeah.
he wanted to write a book where the message was not, hey, um, all it takes is a charismatic leader to lead you to freedom. The
Yeah.
point he wanted to make was that following someone just because they're a charismatic leader is a very, 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 very dangerous idea.
Mhm.
Um, And then, of course, there's Dune Messiah, which takes place after the first Dune, which, if you didn't get it in the original Dune, Dune Messiah basically drives the point home, almost
Yeah.
to like a comically egregious amount.
Yeah.
And I think Villeneuve is going to be making part three, especially
Okay.
part two is like it's expected to make like 180 million in its opening weekend or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that's a bit much, but like it's still,
Yeah.
regardless, it's unbelievable turnout.
Yeah. Last question for me before we move on to our actual discussion. But I've seen people on Twitter really hyping this movie up as like, it's a flawless masterpiece. It's, one of the greatest things ever made. Do you feel that the hype is warranted? Like it really lives up to that kind of reputation it's garnered in these first, few days? Or has it gone a little bit overboard?
As someone who was super hyped about the movie and was in despair when I got pushed back, and I've been like super hyped, like waiting for it all this time,
Hmm.
and it so much so that when me and my girlfriend's friend we went to the movie together, um, we got there early and we went into the theater not realizing that we were like 45 minutes early, and
Oh
there were
wow.
already people like the employees were still cleaning it. They're like, "Hey, can you guys
Yeah.
come back?" And we're like, "Sorry, shit."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Absolutely, and then some. It was
Okay.
like, even for me, going
Yeah.
into it knowing, I still couldn't believe what
Yeah. Yeah.
they pulled off. And again, I don't think it's flawless. Well, I don't know if I would say that it has flaws. I think that there are areas where it could have been improved.
Hmm.
I think adding another like 15, 20 minutes to it would have helped flesh out some um, aspects of the world. A lot was cut from the novel. Nothing in like a really like devastating way. The
Yeah.
changes they made, I actually thought were all pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Very. However, I think the biggest thing for me is the fact that so many people are being taken, because we can talk about them. There's Star Wars, there's Lord of the Rings. Um, for some people it's that, for some people it's Lord of the Rings, but in general, I'd say Star Wars and Lord of the Rings are very standard Hollywood tales. There's good guys, there's
Yeah.
bad guys, there's redemption, there's et cetera, et cetera. Um, Dune is not that. Dune is sort of the
Yeah.
antithesis of that. And the fact that so many people are being receptive to such a very anti Hollywood, anti sort of like modernistic
Yeah.
storytelling um, tale, is that to me is what is the
Yeah.
biggest triumph of Dune.
Yeah.
This is not a conventional good guy bad guy story.
Yeah.
Um, and the fact that it's a blockbuster
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
just like unbelievable. It's
Yeah.
just like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, eat your heart out. I think that
Yeah.
if Denis pulls off part three, we're
Mhm.
talking like GOAT trilogy, film
Yeah.
trilogy potential.
Okay. Well, maybe you've sold me. Maybe I will go see it. Like I said, I wasn't super hyped going into it, but I might definitely check it out now. So,
Part two's the juice.
yeah.
It's where the
Okay.
juice is. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see if I can go see that. But let's move on to our real discussion that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about kind of the two newest shows in our sphere of influence, True Detective, and then we're going to touch on Avatar: The Last Airbender live action at the end here a little bit. But let's start with True Detective because that finished its run a few weeks ago. We hadn't had a chance to discuss the full series until we both finished it. We both watched it at this point, and I want to say, as someone who a few episodes ago was saying like, "Hey, let's give this show a chance." Let's not prejudge it. Let's not go with any expectations. Having sat through the whole thing, it absolutely sucks. It's dog shit.
Absolutely. It was the worst piece of shit I've ever seen in my life.
Again, I don't know whose specific fault it is. I think it was kind of set up in a way there where it kind of couldn't be successful. I really don't think this show should have been branded True Detective because um on its own it might have been without that label, I think it might have been appreciated a little bit more, but definitely as a part of True Detective, I'm like, this show is a mess. And I tweeted about that, like bad acting in a lot of ways, like very stiff acting. I was really surprised, specifically about Jodie Foster. I really expected kind of more from her. I was wondering if it would eventually kind of get there, kind of doing something similar to what Matthew McConaughey did at the beginning of True Detective season 1, where it starts out a little bit where you're like, I don't quite know about this character, and then it really picks up and gets going. It really doesn't with her or with Agent Navarro. The storyline is kind of a mess. The character arcs are really weird. They don't go anywhere. It's awkward, and the mystery, it really sucks. I don't get it at all. I think it's stupid.
I don't even know what the resolution was. It was a shame because like we talked. I think we talked about it prior. It's like come the by like the second or third episode, I was like, okay, I'm gonna stay positive because I know the other seasons of True Detective, they did take a bit to get into it, particularly seasons 2 and 3. It did take a while to build up, but I was like, oh, maybe it'll have some juice, after. And then episode 4 came around, and like still nothing happened. And then episode 5, the ending of episode 5, like shit goes down, like it actually like shit pops off in like a big way, but it came way too late in the story for like pretty much the audience to care. Like episode 5 I think is like the best episode of the show because like all these subplots and all these like we find spoilers I guess, although you should not watch it, it's not worth your time. We find out that we found out the oil companies trying to cover up their deaths. We find out that the woman in charge of the oil company had something to do with Annie's death. We find out that Pryor's father also had something to do with it. It's like, oh shit's like actually there's actual like intrigue going on. And in the ending of the episode where Pryor has to kill his own father, I was like, oh my god, this is actually like drama, conflict. Let's go. And so I do have to say, like my hopes were high. I was like, hey, at least we'll get a good finale. And then it just proceeded to squander almost not only did it squander because like that was my issue with season 2. My issue with season 2 was that like you set up all this stuff and it paid off in like a really like crappy anticlimactic way. Season 4 it didn't really pay off. It like there were like half a dozen plot things like left on
The
it
character
what
arcs really don't make any sense to me. And in
they don't
fact,
make any sense.
even that killing, Pryor's killing of his father, while that's a dramatic moment, I didn't feel like that contributed to his arc at all because
Not really.
the conflict was with him was set up between him and Jodie Foster's character, right? There's this whole thing about him
Picking his
choosing
family,
her
yes.
over the family, and you would expect that like his character growth would be him standing up to her and being like, no, I choose my family, whatever, but he doesn't. He continues until the very end picking her, which also could be a story, but his wife just forgives him for all of that for no reason. He kills his father, and then his wife is just like, okay, I trust you again. I'll take you back. Go do what you got to do. And like again, there's no arc to it. He didn't make a choice or a change that actually affected anything about his character. And that again, that's pretty much the case for all of these characters. I felt like the conflict between again, I can't even remember her name, but Jodie Foster's character and Agent Navarro, they set up this thing that doesn't actually ever pay off. Like I don't think they ever worked on their relationship or changed it in any way to justify this kind of big fight that they'd had before the series started. Again, I said this in a tweet, but it felt like they just jammed in these like elements from all of the previous 3 seasons without really understanding what they were. Right? We have the Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson fight from season 1 just jammed in here. We have the kind of contemporary setting from season 2. We have this like it borrows the element from season 3 where the ending is very anticlimactic, like on purpose. Like it seems like that was what they were going for. The ending is hinted that it's heavily implied that there was no real magic stuff happening. It was just the
Well,
Native American women killing the guys at the end.
so this is where it gets like completely off the rails. So it seems to explain everything. It explains who killed. I did think that the fact that the Salal scientists were the ones who killed Annie, I thought that was pretty interesting. Although the it kind of like stretched my disbelief. Like if it's like it would be one thing if like maybe like they found out Annie was spying on them and then they
Mhm.
kind of like decided together. But the fact that just like these like dudes who are all just like science nerds all of
Yeah,
a sudden
no.
just commit murder. It's like
Yeah,
that was a little weird.
no.
Um like I like the idea and concept. It was
Yeah,
you
the
know, but
execution wasn't right.
and then and then furthermore for like yeah, so like it turns out the Native American uh I think the cleaning crew of the Salah station, they find out somehow. It was weird. Like the woman, the way she finds out is like she finds a hole in the wall and then she, for whatever reason, climbs down into it. Which
Mhm.
why would you do that? And then she finds the tool and then recognizes it from crime scene photos. But like, how did you get a hold of the crime scene photos?
Yeah,
Um, but then it's like, okay, so then the women, um, take them out and they leave them in the cold. It's like, okay, like
yeah.
again, the idea of that, I like what they're going for, but two, so yeah, so to your point, it implies that like, okay, there's a rational explanation to all of this. But then one, um earlier in the season it mentions that uh the scientists did not die from freezing. They died, or it's implied rather, they died from cardiac arrest prior to freezing to death.
Yeah.
Um implying that they were scared to death of something.
Yeah.
That never gets addressed. And then two, at the very end, Navarro goes to the main woman and she's like, "Oh, so you left Annie's tongue there as a like a warning, like you wanted
Yeah.
her case to be solved." But then she's like, "No." So then it's implied that, oh no, that was maybe
I
a sub supernatural, or maybe the woman was lying. But then why would she lie? But then if she wasn't, then how the hell did she even get the tongue? I was like, what the hell
it's
is going on?
again, they're just jamming these elements together. It's like, again, they wanted that kind of twist like the ending of season 3 where it's like this kind of subversion where you're expecting this really crazy thing and it's actually this very simple thing that happened with the kid who survived at the end, right? Um they're trying
Which
to have they're trying to have both elements. Go ahead.
which to be sorry not to cut you off, but like
Yeah.
to be fair to season 3, just in case anyone is listening to this, season 3 purposely does this in a very
Yeah.
meaningful. I actually think it is the best ending of the series, all 4 seasons. I think it is the
Mhm.
best ending. Um, it's 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 brilliantly ironic, I think
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
good way to put it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's purposeful.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
was just a mess.
No. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too because I think the implication was that like Annie's spirituality or some kind of Native American spirituality was guiding these events, even though there was a rational explanation behind the women killing these scientists or whatever.
It's like, okay, yeah, it's like what?
I don't get that doesn't explain all the weird stuff we've been seeing, or maybe it does again, but it's like either commit to one or the other. Either commit to this kind of world where there is no, you know, magic or science or whatever, or let it have that element in there. But again, they're just trying to have their cake and eat it too. And what I really don't understand was if it was just the women who killed these guys at the end, why was that one guy insane? Annie's boyfriend. Why was he like raving and ranting and insane like a demon had possessed him when he just I guess he just knew that the Native American women were coming to kill them and he hid. But then he's all like time is a oh god, that time is a flat circle thing
That was
was
so
so
dumb,
cringy. That was
so
the
stupid.
so stupid. Again, I have said before that the Lovecraftian element in season 1 is kind of a cheat because there really isn't a Lovecraftian element. It's just kind of there. But at least for that one guy, the drug addict pedophile guy, it kind of makes sense to why he would be like this. Again, he's a drug addict. It's, you know, maybe he's seeing into these other worlds and these other possibilities, but I really don't understand why Annie's boyfriend was portrayed as like crazy when in reality there was really no reason for him to be like insane. You know, it's just if something rational happened to these guys.
I think the implication is that he was sort of driven insane as a result of the guilt over what he did to Annie. But then that doesn't explain, for example, why did he have like a seizure?
Yeah.
Remember, like when right before the lights went on, and he
Yeah,
has like
yeah.
kind of like a seizure, and then he goes, "She's awake," and it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what? So,
What
and
is that? Yeah.
so
O
I think
or maybe it is
I
Annie's ghost, again, guiding these Native American women, but again, they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. It's trying to be rational, and it's also trying to be spiritual.
it kind of felt like and this is something, a lot of people compare it to like True Detective. A lot of people compare it to the X Files, where
Mm,
there is sort of this: is there a rational explanation? Is there a supernatural? But yes, but the X Files, the entire point was that like it was structured that way, where it was always sort of this teeter totter, where we're not
mhm.
really sure. Like it could
Yeah,
be, it could not. It really depends on your frame of reference. And there is a way they could have done that. They could have like had a situation where we're not exactly sure what happened, and there is a rational explanation and there is a supernatural explanation, and you're sort of free to decide
yeah,
based on your own predilections what you think happened. There was a way that you could have ended the
yeah,
show in a fashion like that, but this didn't seem purposeful. This
yeah,
felt
yeah,
very like, to your point, we were maybe going with supernatural at some point, but then we decided against it, or vice
yeah,
versa. um it was just all over the place.
yeah,
Also, it's just silly. Probably my favorite part at the end was when um, Navarro and Danvers go to confront the woman, and then one by one, every single woman who was involved walks out,
yeah,
and it's like, she didn't know that you guys were coming. So like, were
yeah,
you all just hanging out, just
yeah.
waiting for this? It was kind of silly, but yeah.
Yeah. I also the ending was so weird because I think you talked about this too. I don't understand like what happened at the end where she's doing this interview with the police again, borrowing this element from season 1, the whole telling a story to the cops about what really happened, and we're seeing the truth in flashback or whatever. I don't understand why they build up this big mystery that like what happened to Navarro, she left, but then at the end, we see her there with Danvers at a house or something, and I'm like, I don't understand what this is trying to imply at all. There was no reason for her to disappear. She's not wanted. It's not like again Matthew McConaughey's character in season 1 where he's a suspect or whatever. They introduced this weird element at the end that she disappeared, but apparently they're still friends, and she's hiding her somewhere. I really don't
Well,
get it.
that was weird, where it was like, I didn't get that either. So yeah, the ending implies that for some reason Danvers had to. So, well, at first I thought that the ending implied that like Danvers committed suicide, which that was a really weird theme. It really kind of seemed like the show, maybe accidentally, it kind of tried to because they sort of like play up like, the spiritual world and whatnot. It did seem to kind of imply that like suicide is something that can have like, there's like some sort of like, I don't want to say value, but like it's not. It can be like, it can be peaceful, and like, you can find, and it's like, I don't care like what culture you're from. I don't think that that's good. That's not okay. I don't think any even Native Americans would be cool with that. Um, so it kind of seemed that like Navarro is like, oh, she may have killed herself, but she's at peace now, and it's like, what? Um, but then it kind of implies that she didn't kill herself and she's hiding out with Danvers. But then the question is like, why is she in hiding? And then it's like, because Pryor's dad, he took care of the bodies, so they didn't find them. So there's nothing to cover up. Um, I think the other guy, the crazy dude, he died by going out into the cold. So it's not like she murdered him. If she murdered him, that would have been one thing. It's like, okay, that makes sense as to why she decided to flee. Um, yeah, I don't know. To your point, it's set up as if like she had to go on the run for some reason, but it doesn't explain why. And maybe I don't. Yeah, no.
Again, I just feel like they had these kind of story beats in mind Again, borrowing elements to try to make the show more like True Detective. A lot of these stuff feels like later editions, because we talked about this before, but the director had this storyline idea from a previous thing she was working on, and when they offered her True Detective, they uh or she adapted it for this show, and a lot of this stuff feels like they just were like, okay, we got to make it kind of more like True Detective, so let's take these elements from all the previous seasons and jam it in here where they don't belong. And again, maybe if the show didn't have to be branded True Detective, if it was just called Night Country, the writer might have naturally avoided some of this stuff. But again, it's coming way too late in the narrative to make any kind of sense whatsoever, and a lot of it just doesn't go anywhere. Like the whole Navarro can see into the other side and stuff like that. It's just like, what is this actually do? They don't know what else, to never explain what happened with her in like Iraq or whatever, where
They
they have this
completely dropped
scene.
that.
They have the scene where she's with some guy who got his head blown off, and it means nothing. Like it's not a detail she's working through in her backstory. Again, maybe it's just hinting that she's got like psychological trauma from her time at war. But again, they don't do anything with it. She's not overcoming her PTSD. It's more so her story arc is just kind of learning to discover the spirituality of her people or whatever.
I don't even know what her story. I don't even know what Danvers' arc was. It set up. Oh, she overcame her son, but did she? Like what? And then Danvers was like her finally. And it's a shame too, because like particularly with Navarro, they set up something very, maybe even by accident, but they set up something pretty clear where she is haunted by her mother's mental illness
Hmm.
and her sister's mental illness.
Yeah,
So obviously they could have played with that where she kind of feels as though she is also going sort of losing her mind.
yeah,
Very similar, a similar sort of style to like Rust in season one to some extent.
yeah,
And they could have played with that, and that's how they sort of could have intertwined the supernatural.
yeah, yeah,
Using Navarro, it's like, is this actually happening? Is
yeah,
she
yeah,
actually? And I think that is what they were, because another huge plot hole, maybe it isn't. Um, in episode 3, when the guy who survived from the ice corpse or
hmm,
corpsicle, when he's in the hospital bed and he codes, and
yeah,
then Danvers goes out to like break up a fight, and then he kind
yeah,
of sits up and points at Navarro. I don't know if we're supposed to imply that that was, and okay, so that's a perfect example of a scene where, okay, maybe that did happen, or maybe Navarro was
yeah,
imagining it. And that is a scene where you could have let sit, and that would have been totally fine
yeah,
if you really developed this plot with this sort of like
yeah.
idea with Navarro going forward. But at the end, you never explain that.
No.
And so it doesn't become this like interesting, was it this or that? It's just
Yeah.
meaninless. And it, to
It
your point, it just makes it feel like it was supposed to be part of something and it got scrapped at some
yeah.
point.
I feel like what honestly probably made the show better is if they combine Navarro and Danvers, because it feels like they each have half of a character story going on, and really it could only be if it was one character, it might have been tighter together, because I do see the Rust, like kind of learning to let go of cynicism and embrace optimism element from season 1,
Yeah.
but it's spread between the two of them, right? It's Danvers with her dead son and Navarro with her mother and whatever. And both of them feel like half of a character. Where if it was one person, maybe the storyline could have worked. But again, Danvers has no arc because she's kind of half Rust, half Woody Harrelson's character. So also the relationship with her daughter goes nowhere either. Like again, they set up like a conflict between the two, and it resolves through no action of her own. Like the daughter just calls her at the end and is like, Mom, please come home. I've forgiven you for all the conflict between us. But she did nothing. There was no active change on her part that would have, changed the relationship and made this character story work. It just kind of resolves itself at the end because they have to, because, we're at episode 6 and we got to end the series. So,
Yeah, it
um,
didn't go anywhere. And then it didn't really explore her. I don't know. That's the funny thing too, is like they kind of seem to like hide what happened with Danvers' son throughout the entire
yeah,
thing. Like they set up this big
like it's a
mystery,
mystery, but it's
and then
not.
he just died in a car crash. And it's like you
It,
could have told us that in the first episode. Like
If
it'd be
this
one
is a
thing.
character thing, it should be
Yeah,
told
there's
earlier.
no reason. Like for example, the the guy who killed his girlfriend or his wife,
Mhm.
setting that up, like us not knowing who killed, because we find out in like episode 3 that he shot, quote unquote, shot himself, but then it's highly implied that
Yeah.
either Navarro or Danvers did it, and that could have been interesting. Okay, that's a mystery we can set up, and then maybe in the last episode, it shows us either Danvers or Navarro did it. I think it
Yeah.
was Navarro,
Yeah.
which I did. I thought that was I thought it was going to be Danvers, but again, it's like you didn't. Okay, that was a cool
Yeah.
mystery. That was a cool way you set it up. But like, what does it mean? It didn't really
No,
mean
it
anything
doesn't
for
it doesn't
anything.
pay off. It doesn't connect to anything either. Again, the whole, the fact that they killed that guy, the pedophile guy in season 1, it was deeply tied to the story and the characters or whatever. This more so just felt like a thing they borrowed from season 1 to make it more like True Detective, but it's not connected to anything. That guy they killed is not connected to the Annie case at all. And it doesn't have to literally be connected as part of like one big case, but it doesn't even feel like it's part of the theme that they're exploring this with the whole, Salal station or whatever. It's not, it's just a peripheral detail about their backstory that doesn't actually ever pay off to anything. I also think I, I mean, the Salal thing, the whole sci-fi angle of it, of they were like, it's a twist because the scientists were the one pushing the mine to pollute more, so they could get the DNA or whatever. I get the twist angle of it, but I thought that was just so stupid. I was like, this
Which
is
I
the
don't.
most this is the most efficient way you have to mine it. You have to like pollute something hundreds or not hundreds, but like, miles and miles away from your station, because the station is not next to the mine. You have to pollute the whole landscape to make it easier to get to the permafrost. You don't have fucking drills. Like, this is so stupid.
And also, it's like, what? So, what message are we sending? It's like the bad guys aren't the oil companies; it's the
It's scientists.
scientists who are. They're trying to help people too hard, and they end up committing
Yeah.
murder and
Yeah.
threatening the lives of it. And it's like, especially like it'd be one thing if it was like that's the other issue where it's like it'd be one thing if it was like one scientist,
Yeah.
um, but like you're telling me like an entire team all unanimously agreed to like poison an entire town. Like
Well, that's the
that's
thing.
not.
They don't explore any of the characters at the Slaw Station.
Yeah,
The scientists are not characters in the show. It's not like they're the villain like Tuttle or whatever in season 1. Like, these are like basically unnamed characters, right? I mean, they have names, but I would dare someone to actually remember any of them besides the boyfriend, right? It's like they have no personality. They just killed this woman randomly for no reason, basically, because she smashed up their shit. Which also, by the way, I don't understand how that worked, because she smashed up some stuff in that ice cave, but presumably they would have been like cataloging their research and putting it in a computer, right? It's not like smashing their stethoscope or their beakers or whatever down in that science room, or that ice room, would just destroy all the research they had done up until that point. They acted like she's like, again, I understand she did some damage, but like, again, I feel like this was written by people who don't actually understand science. Like, they're just like, oh, she smashed up their test tube, so the scientists lost their work, so they went crazy and killed her. Um,
that was also
yeah,
weird. Where it's like, and I don't mean to like say like. I mean, like Annie probably like, she probably knew her shit. She really wasn't stupid, but like they gloss over it where it's like she found the lab and she discovered what we were doing, and it's like,
yeah.
how,
How?
like, what do you mean? She
Yeah,
did she find a there's like obviously there's like a sort of like suspension of disbelief, like, oh,
yeah.
there was a computer open and she saw emails, like whatever, that would have been fine, but like what specifically, because like the process that you're talking about like we're purposely polluting the area
Yeah,
to see it, like I presume that if you're doing something that egregiously
yeah,
immoral and illegal, you probably don't have that like written on a
yeah,
whiteboard
yeah.
somewhere. Like, this is what we're doing. So like, and like again, there is suspension of disbelief, but like that's like to the point where again, just have a scene where it's like she found an email or something, or she overheard a conversation
Oh,
between two of the scientists or
yeah.
whatever. But like she just finds a lab, and then she's, "Oh, they must be polluting the mi," it's like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Also, by the way, this plot makes no sense. Like, why? I understand the mind is like a greedy, corporate, thing that doesn't care about people, whatever. But like, why are they taking orders from these scientists to like, pollute more? Like, what are they getting out of it? And also, who wrote on that whiteboard, "We're all dead"? Like, who wrote that? Like, was it the boyfriend when he was crazy or whatever? Like,
Either, well, no, because he was in
he
the
hid in the
hole.
thing. Yeah. I mean, maybe
So
he came out at some point and wrote that in between when they take the ladies out. But again, why is he doing this? Just because he went crazy with guilt or whatever? It just like they're setting up all these elements just because it's cool, but it actually falls apart when you apply any like thought to it at all. Nothing basically in the season really made sense.
yeah, I don't, and, or maybe, like, one of the women did it, but, like, then why would you do
For
that?
what? For why?
Yeah,
Like,
and also it's just like, um, it's like, I know they had guns, but, like, the women who, like, it's like, you're asking me to believe that, like, and it's not because it's like a man or woman thing, it's just like, so there's a group of people, and you're able
yeah,
to round them up and get them out there and make them take off their clothes. At that point, it's like, why wouldn't they just run? Like,
yeah,
it's just in order to set up, because, like, that was the shame, is, like, the setup of it, of, like, them all being found in, like, the corpsicle. That was a really intriguing setup. I
yeah,
wonder how it came about. And then you look into it, and it's, like, the most contrived manner possible.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, "Oh, well, they all got brought out, and they took their clothes off." And then they mentioned something like, it was weird too, where it was like, at the end, she kind of implies that, like, "Oh, we didn't actually mean to kill them. They were just
yeah.
gonna go out, and their clothes were waiting for them if they came back." And it's like,
I
"What?"
I
It's
I
what,
think
like,
again, this is that weird thing they're doing where they're combining the spirituality part with the logical part, which is I think the implication was that if they went insane and died out there, it was because Annie's spirit like had decided to kill them basically. If it didn't,
okay.
then she would have I don't know. Again, I don't know
That's
if
some,
that's
like
true or not, but
that's some, like, Salem witch trial shit where they're like, "Hey, if she floats or if she sinks, she's not a witch," or something like that, yeah.
again, they're trying to have both these elements together, and again, like you said, it could work, but it just really doesn't. Like the way it's jammed together like this makes no sense. This show needed another two or three drafts of the story to really kind of iron this stuff out. Which,
Yeah.
by the way, we'll finish up our talk here, but that's also my criticism of Avatar, which I want to save us enough time to talk about that. So any final stuff you want to share about True Detective, or should we just leave it on? It's a pile of shit. Don't watch it.
I feel bad. I'm actually glad that we're doing this because, I like, for every episode, I've been, like, leaving my thoughts on the community tab, and
Yeah,
obviously I haven't done the finale yet, and
yeah,
I've been meaning to, but it's just like, I don't even have anything to say about it. Like, people
no,
are like, "You're gonna make a video," and I'm like, "Not really," because, like, at least with, like, season 2, I could sort of, like, articulate, here's what they were trying to set up, and here's why it didn't work out. But with this, I'm like, it
yeah.
didn't go anywhere. So it's like, I don't, yeah, no, I have,
We'll
it's not even worth the energy to
no.
continue. Yeah.
We'll leave it on this. They're gonna make True Detective season 5. It's gonna be the same director, and it's gonna be good this time, guys. We promise. We promise it's gonna be better this time around. So we'll
That
see.
the one thing though, and so this is like going back to our talk again. I don't think that, like, people are like, and that was the unfortunate part about, like, season 4 ending badly, is that, like, all the idiots who liked it for the wrong reasons suddenly felt vindicated.
Yeah,
See, I was right, and it's like, shut the fuck up. You're still an idiot.
yeah.
Um, but Nick, did you see Nick Pizzolatto's reaction?
Yeah,
He
yeah,
was
that's
like,
so bad. Like,
so cringy. Oh, he was,
God,
like,
if you,
retweeting negative, and,
yeah,
like, he was retweeting negative reviews from, like, nobody
yeah,
accounts.
yeah.
It's like, "Bro, this is, like,
Oh my God,
cringy.
and
Stop."
if he had just been quiet about it and just been like, hey, it happens, right? He would have come off looking so good of like, yeah, you're right. Nick is the one who really should have this,
Yeah,
but
if he
his
just kept his mouth shut, he shoulda,
yeah,
but then he, like, retweets, or, like, Instagram posts, like, negative reviews like a preteen girl. Um, as cringy as he was, the fact that it got renewed for season 5, um I just can't help but think that he must have been, like, because he probably felt so vindicated when it was
Well,
bad, and then
yeah.
it got renewed, and he's like, "Fuck."
Well, you can see this behavior is why they don't want to work with him, right? It's like
That's
even
kind of
even
yeah.
even if even if like again, I understand probably it was a bad experience for him to get kicked off his own show, basically. But if he had conducted himself with some professionalism, I don't think it would have happened. I think that they would only really like kick him off if he was basically being like a baby about it, which he clearly is being. Um, and it's just like, man, just have some dignity, right? Like, just accept that it happened, and you could probably get another show deal if you were a little bit more professional about this shit. And maybe he will. Who knows? But again, the point of crying about it publicly, y- I don't want to like I don't want to be cowardly and say you should never talk shit about anything, but kind of really, if you're a professional in this industry, you should kind of only like just say positive stuff if you can and avoid unnecessary drama. Just because I think the studio is looking at him like, yeah, we're never gonna hire this guy again because he's again a piece of shit.
Yeah, it was funny how it's like his behavior. I was like, oh, okay, so everything that like I suspected
Yeah, yeah,
about, because like the whole thing with season one and him being a diva,
yeah,
it
yeah,
could have been maybe misreports, and then obviously Kerry Joji Fukunaga. I didn't know this. Apparently, he's in like neck deep shit. Like apparently, there's been like dozens of reports from female cast
yeah,
members who have
yeah,
come out against him. I didn't know about that. I was actually, it was funny. I was wondering after No Time to Die, well, whatever happened to him? And
yeah,
then
yeah,
when I was making the video, and I just didn't think to look it up.
yeah,
But then now looking at it, it's like, oh wow, you no, Piz, you were actually just like a toxic piece of shit, weren't you?
yeah, yeah,
So the one shining silver lining is that it getting renewed is the funniest thing that could have
yeah, yeah.
possibly happened. But
Yeah.
yes,
It'll be interesting to see again. I don't I don't have high hopes for season 5, but we'll see what happens.
am I going to tune into this shit show? Probably, unfortunately.
I mean, what else are we gonna do, right? We have a media podcast essentially where we watch shit. And speaking of that, let's talk about Avatar, which again, Mac has only seen the first 3 episodes, which I think is an okay representation of the show, enough to talk about it. Um, I mean, do you care about spoilers at all? I mean, there's no real like spoilers from the show. They don't do anything fundamentally different, but there were a couple elements I thought might be interesting to talk about from future episodes. So do you care about that at all?
Oh no, not at all.
Okay, yeah, so let's talk about it. I do not think the show is great, but I don't hate it the way that a lot of people are talking about. I think it's not great, but not god awful. Like it really, like, again, like we just talked about before, it needed another draft. This really feels like a first draft script that we're seeing. And it really needed to be tightened up. Like the dialogue needed to be tightened up, the story elements needed to be tightened up. But for what it is, for the most part, I can kind of see what they're going for. And I don't hate it. I just think it could be a lot better if they had put more work into it.
So yeah, I can't speak super well. I've only seen the first 3 episodes. However, I was on another friend's podcast, Celtic Phoenix, um, who I was chilling with them, and I felt kind of guilty for not having seen it. But part of the reason I didn't was because I told them, I was like, the first 2 episodes were really rough. They like the big things for me was like opening with um, the massacre of the air temple. I thought was a huge mistake. I thought it was way more impactful to sort of leave that like that's why it's so cool in the anime when they arrive at the temple, like because we know but we don't know, and it's like this building tension of
Hey, real
um
quick, I don't want to interrupt you, but you interrupted me earlier. Do people give
yes,
you shit when you call Avatar anime? Because you know it's not,
not
right?
not that I've seen. Is it not? Oh, is
No,
anime specifically in
it's
Japan?
anime is Japanese animation. This is a Western cartoon. I don't care. I like it's obviously anime inspired, but I've heard you call it anime before, and I was wondering if people give you shit for that because they absolutely do when other people call it anime.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Anime influenced.
Yes, yes. It's a
Can I
it's a
call it?
Western cartoon.
I'll call it wanime. All right,
Anime. That's a
wanime,
good one.
Western anime, wanime. So
Yeah.
this wanime, shorthand, or like the animated show, I guess I could
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
but like um, so yeah, so the showing the Air Temple Massacre I
Yeah.
thought was a really big mistake, and that because one of my favorite moments of the
Yeah.
show, what of the animated show, was that like build up to them discovering what happened,
Yeah,
and
the
in the
Southern Air
live
Temple.
action it takes like it's like they
They
arrive and boom.
they dump all the information about the show and what it is in the first episode instead of just like letting it slow boil like they do like throughout the series. Like they tell you like why Aang left. They tell you everything about the character up front. They tell you about the plans that the Fire Nation is going to do rather than again slow boiling. I really think that first episode is sucks for that reason.
Yes, and there's like 3 different exposition dumps between there's one by Kyoshi, there's one by, Nan, there's one by it's like, "What are you doing? Just chill."
I also think they kind of ruined Aang's character a little bit in the fact that they had him he left the air temple on accident. Like he just went on a
Yes.
walk basically rather than running away, which is such a big part of his character. And in fact, in the show, he constantly talks about the fact that he failed as the avatar or whatever, but it kind of doesn't make sense because in the cartoon, he absolutely did fail because he ran away from his responsibility. But here it was an honest mistake. He was just like, "Hey, let's go for a quick walk." And while he was at it in town, that's when the Fire Nation attacked. So it really wasn't his
Why
fault.
why would they do that? That is the
Yeah.
entire basis of his character, is that he
Yeah.
was running away from his responsibilities, and then he did, and then he lost everything in the blink of an eye, and everyone he knew was taken from him. And then but
Here's
then
the
in the I almost like I had to ask the Celtic Fiend, the other podcast I
yeah.
went on, I had to ask them for clarification because I was like, "There's no way they did that." And they're like, "No, yeah, he just like stepped out for a smoke break, and then
Yeah.
he got." And it's like,
Literally.
"Bro, that's
Yeah.
what the fuck?"
It's so odd. Like I really feel that like a lot of the problems this show has is I don't think the writers were comfortable like just copying the story elements and copying the dialogue from the cartoon. I feel like they had to invent their changes to justify their jobs because especially like I know you're only on episode 3, but when you get to 4, which by the way 4 is like the worst piece of shit I've ever seen. Like it honestly might be the worst episode of television I've ever seen, episode 4, Into the Dark. Um the story changes they make to that episode are so bad. I just feel like they had to do them in order to justify their salaries. Because I feel like if they just because you could honestly just copy and paste a lot of stuff from the scripts from the original series into this new one, and it would still probably work. But I feel like if they did that, they were scared that they would get fired or not paid or something, and so they had to make these changes. Which is really sad because as I commented on your community post about that episode 3 Omashu, while it wasn't great, I thought it was actually like pretty interesting the way they combined the 3 or 4 episode stories into one episode. I
Very
liked it a
inspired.
lot. In
Yeah,
fact, graded on the curve of this show, I actually think it's a good episode. Like I think it's a good piece of television.
very inspired decision in my
Yeah,
very
but
clever, yes.
4 throws it all away. Like 4 is
Really.
so stupid.
That's
Like
what I was worried about, that's why I didn't wanna continue.
here's the thing though. Once you get past 4, by the way, every episode is basically a two-parter, so you can kind of think of them as like two episodes connected moving forward.
Okay.
Once you get past that, I think 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 are not great, but they're okay. Like I didn't mind watching it after I got past 4, but once I watched 4, I was like I almost didn't want to keep watching it. It was that bad.
Is for the episode, because this was spoiled for me, and I'm very because like to your point, I completely agree. Changes need to be made. Changes can be made. Not just for like, hey, what can
There
we
are good
improve?
changes too, which I want to talk
There
about a little
were
bit.
there were some good changes, especially with how they handled Amashu. Just to set up that, I thought that was great. Obviously, things aren't going to play out exactly as they will in an animation, so
Mhm.
um, that's fine. However, particularly there's two big ones that I've heard of. One is Aang not running away,
Yep.
which is devastating to his
Yeah,
character. I
yeah.
don't know why they do that. And two, I haven't gotten here, but I wonder if this is what you're talking about. Zuko fights back in the Agna Kai against
Yeah.
Ozai. What
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fuck? That's like paramount to
Yeah, yeah.
that. Like, but see, that's like a thing where it's not even like, oh, we can change this here. Like,
Yeah.
that is so. unbelievably such an unbelievable
Yeah,
misunderstanding
yeah,
of the purpose of a scene. It's like
yeah.
the fact that how could you even do that by mistake? That's
What
insane.
Well, here's the thing. I actually don't. I mean, I agree. He shouldn't have fought. I don't hate it as much as other people have talked about that change, and it's because of this. So this is the good changes in the show,
Okay.
or at least good concepts. Like I think you talked about this before, but like a lot of the show has some ideas. In theory, they're good. It's just in execution they don't work as much as they probably could have. Again, this show needed more drafts. This again, everything about this show feels like a first take, even the acting. And I really hate to be negative on acting because I understand these are like some very young kids, some of these people, but the acting is so bad. Like it feels like they just got one take for a lot of these scenes and just moved on. Like Katara, especially. I don't know her age or whatever, but she is god awful. Like the actress who plays Katara.
Well, from what I understand too, they kind of like I don't want to say neuter, but they kind of strip Katara of a lot of her personality from the uh
They make her like
animation.
the Ember Island players version of herself. Honestly, they make her like a joke basically. But anyway, let me talk about the good thing real quick, which is I see what the show is trying to do in some situations where they're trying to give some more depth to some of the characters who, while are entertaining in the cartoon, are a little bit one dimensional. One example you've seen already is Zhao, right? Zhao in the cartoon is just a villain from start, right? He's a rival for Zuko. He's an entertaining villain, but there's not a lot of depth to him. They're giving him a storyline in this thing where he's rising from like kind of the bottom. He's like a nobody commander who Zuko is like in charge of basically, and Zhao has to kind of do what he says. But they're setting him up as like someone like a Machiavellian kind of guy who's like rising up the ranks like through like manipulation and stuff like that. So I don't think it's great, the writing for his character, but I see what they're trying to do. And that whole thing with Zuko, I don't want to like spoil it a little bit. I want to let you get to it when you get. It's not a huge spoiler, or whatever, but they give that fight with the father some more depth on Zuko's end, and they also give the father like Ozai. They give him more depth too. Like you actually get the sense that he's not 100% evil. Like there's some kind of like love in his heart for some of his family, which is again you could say that's a bad thing because the Fire Lord in the cartoon is such a in apotheosis of evil basically, but I think that they're trying to make some of these characters more sympathetic. They don't, it doesn't always work, but I see what they're trying to do and give some of these characters more depth, and I give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in some of these cases.
Well, that's the thing. It's like again, from what I heard from uh my other friends in the pod, I trust their opinion. I like
Yeah,
they're it's like you pretty much like you and a select other few are people who I'm like because like even on my Twitter sometimes like even some of my like followers who I like go back and forth with sometimes I don't even trust their opinion because I'm
yeah,
like I've
no,
seen kind of like your takes on stuff and you're kind of like are you kind of like too much of a like an anti-wokey like or
yeah, yeah,
do you have like some like issues with women? I don't know. I run into that a lot, but like you and some others are like the core people I look to of like I can trust you for your
yeah,
like
yeah,
honest take. So based on what you said and them, I'm not only do I feel confident moving forward, I'm going to try to finish it in the coming weeks. I've just been busy with some
yeah,
other
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
But particularly I'm hoping it gets renewed because one, um, book two cooks.
yeah,
Like book two is my favorite book of the
yeah,
show. Given their uh, it seemed like their creative instincts of like combining different storylines. I
yeah,
actually think that could translate to
yeah,
book two very well because it's a lot more sort of serialized. And preferably, if the writers do listen to the complaints of season one, sort of understand because, like, again, there's a lot of ambition.
yeah,
So if they can just sort of like tweak the stuff that didn't work
yeah,
and go into book two with that, I think it could
yeah,
actually be pretty good.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I do have to say, I do think a couple weird things like, I guess them introducing Azula early on is fine. Um, Ozai's quote unquote like depth. It is hard because like he is such an iconically like
Evil
kind of
villain.
one
Yeah.
dimensional character, but it kind of
Yeah.
works in a
It
way.
works. Yeah.
Um, because I think that's sort of like
Well,
a folly of a lot of
yeah.
writers where they're like everyone has to be like multidimensional. It's like no, not
Yeah.
really. There's plenty of characters. Hannibal Lecter,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
plenty of characters that like aren't like super complex or like
Yeah.
morally gray that are like you can still make
Yeah.
good characters. I will say, funny enough, you can spoil it for me because I already asked the others, but when I saw Zhao's characterization in the show up until this point, I was very confused because one of my favorite Zhao moments, as one dimensional as he is, or kind of
Yeah.
sort of like bare bones as he is, one of my favorite moments from him is in the finale where he is being taken away by the moon spirit, and then
Yeah.
Zuko reaches out for him, which is a
Yeah.
great. That's a very important beat for Zuko, I think, too.
Yeah.
Um, and then he refuses it, and I was like, oh, it's a very. I thought that was a very
No,
poignant,
they
powerful
don't do
moment,
it.
and they completely. Which,
They don't
to be
do it.
fair,
Iroh
wouldn't it?
kills him.
Yeah, that's from what I
It's
heard,
so
and it's
stupid.
like, but like to some extent, like from what I've heard of the character, from what I've seen of the character, I was thinking in my head that moment wouldn't fit this character that has been built up so far. So I guess
Yeah.
the writers were, in that sense, they
I
were
I will
correct
s-
not
I
to
will
do it.
say that
But
I will say this. They've given him a little bit more depth in the sense that they're portraying him as like coming from nothing and like rising to the top. But they've also robbed him of some of the other depth. But again, that scene where he chooses death, it's not honorable per se, but there's a little bit, you have a little respect for him where he's like he's not a coward. He'll face the death rather than accept help, which is not a good thing. But again, it tells you something about the character. So a lot of the stuff that I said, they give the character more depth. They're also robbing them of other types of depth, and maybe you could say the
yes,
same thing of Ozai, right? By making him have a little bit more affection for Zuko than we see in in the show, um you lose a little bit of that villain mentality there that makes him such an iconic part of the franchise. So a lot of the stuff, even if it's good, it's not great, and I do hope they renew it because I would like to see them address some of this stuff. I would like to see the actors get better. If it They also didn't do any this is they don't, this isn't a spoiler, but they don't do any Aang Qatar romance at all, which I'm like, maybe they're just not doing it because the actor is so young, but like, are they
I did it
eventually going
with
to set that up?
they do it with Sokka though. I personally, I don't know how I feel about Suki's portrayal. I thought that was
Okay, this is the weird thing about, and I want to talk a little bit about, people accusing the show of being woke or whatever. Um, they do this weird thing with all
wait,
the
are
female
they?
characters. Yeah, there's some people who call it that, but we'll talk
I
about
feel
that.
like it.
But
Yeah, I feel like this point people just do it reflexively. Yeah.
I don't think it is at all. But they do this weird thing. Okay, so you remember they made a big deal about like not making Sokka a sexist character.
Mhm.
They do this weird thing with the women where they make them super horny for some, like, I feel like their natural reaction against portraying any kind of sexism in the show is to make the women super horny for the men. Like we saw Suki basically like I fucking Sokka the entire time, and he even like covers his breasts in one scene. It was so weird. Um, they do the same thing with June. You remember the bounty hunter who
Yeah.
rides the mole?
Mhm.
So do you remember that there was some people who had a criticism of like Iroh? There's a scene where Iroh pretends he got hit by the paralysis so he can like hold, like Zuko's like, Uncle, I didn't see you get hit with the
And
tongue,
he's like,
and he's like,
yeah.
shh. And some people were like, oh, that's kind of creepy because he's like holding her against her consent,
I did.
basically.
I personally, it didn't seem like it was kind of just like a
It's just a
slight joke.
joke. It's just a
But
joke.
I, but to be fair, like it didn't. It does seem out of character for Iroh.
Again, it's just this one-off little
Again,
joke,
it's
but
just a one off joke. It's not a big deal. But I will agree. I do think it did seem kind of out of character from him.
yeah, but here's the thing. They address that in the show by instead, like, he shows no interest in June at all, but she's super horny for him. She's like, "Oh, I'll help you guys because your uncle's so sexy. I love, I want to, like." They're the way they address some of the sexism is by, I guess, empowering the women to be super horny for the men, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is something I noticed. I thought it was a funny kind of change up they made.
Well, people, it's funny because like on one hand, I didn't. It's not so much like that Suki's portrayal. Obviously, it kind of makes because again, like part of the reason Suki fell for Sokka was because of his humility. So by
Yeah.
taking out the beat of him, and again, it's kind of weird to almost say, when I think of like sexist, he kind of was just it wasn't even like, was he
It wasn't
sexist or was he
sexism.
just kind of like a dopey boy? Girls have cooties. You're being sexist. It's like
Yeah.
he just it kind of felt like that vibe of like
Yeah.
girls have cooties. Um, 'cause what was he like 14?
Yeah.
Um, but by taking that out, it's just, and to some extent, some of the arguments I've heard make sense. Like, obviously, Suki, this is the first boy she's seen, that, or the first, and it's not just the fact that she's, kind of like has a schoolgirl crush. It's also the fact that like this is a part of her like looking for some sort of life
Yeah.
outside of
Yeah.
her Kyoshi warrior identity, and that's fine. Um, but I just thought the way they, particularly the scene where they have her looking at him showering, it just felt very like cliche, kind of cliche.
Yeah.
Especially like if you're that concerned over portraying even like the most like tame amount of like quote unquote sexism, and then you're gonna have a scene where a character spies on another character
Yeah.
showering. It's like, what are we doing here? Like, where are your priorities right
Yeah,
now? I don't
yeah.
know.
Again, I feel like the way that they felt to address sexism is by having the women essentially be creepy, people hitting on guys or whatever. Which I'm not one of those people who it's like, cares about whether they, again, I think harmless flirting in this case is fine, but again, I just thought that the way they addressed it was by just basically reversing some of this stuff, which I don't know if was the smartest decision. What I Looking back on the show, they actually do portray sexism. They do the storyline where the Northern Water Tribe won't teach Katara because she's a woman, and they actually hit it a lot harder than they did in the show. It actually lasts like over 2 episodes versus the one it lasts in the show.
Oh,
So what I realized then is that they're not scared of sexism. They're scared of showing their main characters in any kind of negative light at all. And
oh, that's so boring.
This includes Zuko, by the way. There are so many scenes in the show of Aang
Oh,
basically being like, guys, you know what? I actually think Zuko's got a good heart. Like, we shouldn't be too hard on him. I think he's got some kind of character backstory that we're going to sympathize with him later on. So the main characters don't even hate Zuko in the first season. They or Iroh. They're literally like, I think these two are actually the good firebenders, and we'll probably see that next season. Like it's so stupid.
and I completely forgot. Zhao was the one, because I only up to 3 episodes, but Zhao was the one who led the assault on Kyoshi Island, not Zuko.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was stupid. That was like, but the whole point of setting Zuko up is like the bad guy, and then you can reverse that. Up until now, yeah, again, they're sanitizing him,
oh,
and this is what's
literally
gonna
they
be,
are.
and this is what's gonna be stupid. It's like, obviously, I presume, I can't imagine. There's no way. I'm putting that thought out of my head. There's no way they're going to take out his reversal at the end of book 2 where he sides with Azula.
No,
That's
no way.
impossible. There's no
No,
way.
they have to do it.
Um, if they do, I'm going to start a riot. But
But
um,
the way they have it right now. There's really no reason why the main characters
what do
wouldn't
you?
trust Zuko.
What's the redemption? Yeah, it's like what are you redeeming him of if he hasn't done anything to be? Yeah.
Like they no, literally, like Aang likes him. There's so many scenes in this thing of basically him being like I know you have a good heart, Zuko. Just change your like. Why does he think Zuko's got a good heart? There's no reason for him to think that. The only reason he thinks that is because we, the audience, know that Zuko is
Yes.
a good person. And again, they're so scared of having Iroh or Zuko or any of the main characters have any negative qualities at all. I really think that's why they changed Sokka. It wasn't about being woke. It wasn't about removing sexism from the show. It was literally just like we cannot have any of the characters have any negative qualities at all. There's scenes like you saw it when they captured Aang. There's scenes of Iroh talking with Aang so that Aang can realize he's a good person. Like we eventually find out Iroh's a good person, right? And we grow to really like him. But they want to rush this stuff so quickly. I don't know why they're doing this.
And I think that was another, just from the scenes I saw of that, I could tell that's what they were doing between Iroh and Aang. They kind of
Yeah,
showed that Iroh's actually like a good guy. He's on your
yeah, yeah.
side. one thing that really bugs me about that is that one thing that I thought was so moving from the show was the fact that at the beginning of the show, Iroh comes off as this very like almost like, it's like, oh, who cares, Zuko?
Yeah,
He's kind of like carefree, but then you
yeah,
find out it recontextualizes it later on when you realize the reason he was doing that was one because he's adopted this lifestyle as a result of losing his son.
yeah,
He's trying to sort of like fight the despair he faces every day, but also this is particularly important in book 2 when he's talking with Toph. He 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 needs Zuko to do it on his own.
yeah,
He doesn't want to like, if I want Zuko, because like at the very end of the show, when Zuko comes back to him, he's like, "You did it on your own," and that was very important to
yeah,
him. It's like, I don't want you to do this just because I'm telling you to. I want
yeah,
you to choose this path on your own, and that's very, very, very important. I think.
yeah,
And then later, once Zuko's like kind of on the edge, he pushes him, but that's way
yeah,
down the line. That's book
yeah,
2.
yeah,
Um, so the fact that they kind of like take that out, where right
yeah,
from the get go, you're like, you kind of get this feeling that Iroh's trying to like,
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. It just didn't. It just, I don't know why
No,
they would change that, but
again, it's just they know that Iroh is a fan favorite, and they don't want to
yeah.
make him look bad in any way, which I think makes him less interesting. Because I do think in book one he would like attack the Avatar or help Zuko capture him. Like he's not fully gone over yet to being like yes, there's a lot of good in him. There's a lot of respect for the other nations and the Avatar, but he is still at that point a member of the Fire Nation and is still supporting their mission essentially. And I think we see him grow over the course of the show. That makes him so fascinating. I love for a lot of people, I loved seeing the scenes of him when he was younger, like leading the siege of Ba Sing Se and stuff like that. It's like, okay, like the reason why characters are interesting is because they grow, and the reason why Zuko and Iroh are consistently ranked as like the best characters in the show is because they actually grow and change. Versus, yeah, the main characters grow and change too, like Aang, Guitar, or whatever, but not as much as some of these other people. Like Sokka's a great example of someone who does grow a lot over the show, and he's also very much a fan favorite too. So
I think
I think they're
of all
robbing us
the
of that.
of all the actors, I think Sokka's actor, I think, is probably the best. Um, what he, or at least as far as at least as far as I've seen.
The other two are
Again,
worse. Aang and Guitar are way worse.
yeah.
I give credit. Aang is so young. Guitar as actress, I want to put the blame on the director, but like the way they deliver the lines is so flat. I don't understand what direction they're giving these kids because
Well,
the
that's sort of like
adults
the
can do the lines fine.
Well, that's sort of the point, and like, to kind of wrap things up. It's like it's hard to kind of like place blame, but like part of the reason why this usually works better off in an animated series is one, because you're working with usually adults who kind of have a better grasp of, taking direction of performances. They have more, experience. Um, or two, this is also why they, cast 25-year-old actors as like teenagers in shows. I mean, obviously it's just because they want the sex appeal and all that stuff. But also it's because a 25-year-old probably is going to be able to convey a lot more emotion and nuance on average than say a 14-year-old actor. Now, that's not to say that there aren't, Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense. He was a brilliant child actor, and there are many brilliant child actors. But I think in general, when it comes to younger actors like that, to some extent, you are rolling the dice. It's like, hey, this could turn out great, or this could turn out kind of, yeah. And is it like, is it whose fault is it? It's like, I don't really think it's anyone's fault. I think it's just a matter of it's just
Well, I
the
think it's
nature.
the director of whatever episode because I think you can get good performances out of these people. I just again, it feels like they did one take for a lot of these scenes. The uh, the actress who plays Katara is 17. The actor who plays Aang is only 14. The actor who plays Sokka is 20 or 21.
I know
And
Suki's actress is 24, I
The actor
think.
who plays Zuko is 22. So again, maybe with Aang we could give some credit, but like at 17, you can get a good performance out of someone. I think she's given bad direction. I just think that a lot of these people are not. It just again, if you even some of the other people like Ken Leung is Zhao, and he's good. Don't get me wrong, but I've seen better from him.
Yeah, that's
It
I
feels
think
a lot of his performance feels rushed.
I think you could that's a good, like, barometer where it's like, how do you know if it's, like, directing or the performance? It's like, is every performance bad? Yes, then it's the directing. Whereas if every performance is kind of like perfect,
Yeah,
same with True Detective.
yeah,
At first, I thought Callie Reese was kind of like I give her more credit because I'm like, oh, she was kind of wooden. But then I saw Jodie Foster,
yeah. She's
and
so wooden.
she was trying her best to make what she was given work. She really, really was. Um, but she just had no character to. There was no semblance of a full character for her to portray, so she was just all over the place.
Yeah,
Um, and so at that point, it's like, to your point, it's either it's like, oh, is it the Sophia Coppola in The Godfather Part 3? Was that her or the directing? It's like, well, seeing as like a lot of the performances in that movie are really, really good, it's we're gonna probably go to her.
yeah,
But if everyone kind of feels wonky, if everything kind of feels off, probably the director.
yeah. So we'll leave it there. I know we're well past our normal time now, but yeah, both shows that I was looking forward to an extent that did not turn out as well as they probably could have. I hope we get more Avatar because I would watch it. I think there's the possibility it could get better. And honestly, it's not so awful that I wouldn't watch it. True Detective season 5, we will really have to see because goddamn, was that bad?
Am I turning in for this shit show? Absolutely. But yes.
You have it there, folks. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode. No One's a Critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.